So let's motherfucking get into it.
You're the golden return, got the strength to carry on. Walk on, my child, walk on.
Hello, beautiful soul family. Britt Cannon here, host of the Walk On podcast, the podcast where I try to demystify spirituality, personal growth and healing, and whatever else I feel like talking about. This week's episode is part 2 of the episode I released 2 weeks ago, which is common traits of adults with childhood trauma. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, LOL, I talked about what those traits are as sort of recognized by, oh boy, Janet G. Woititz, who wrote Adult Children of Alcoholics. And she framed these specifically in adult children of alcoholics, but I think that it's more universal than that. And so when I was reading this book, I was like, this really reminds me of a lot of people that I know, including myself, who've dealt with childhood trauma, whether or not that trauma included addictions that their parents struggle with. So last week, it's just like a lot of information, and I like to attack everything from like spiritual, political, personal, like every which way possible. I like to just like analyze it all, and so it turned into quite the lengthy episode. So last time in part 1, if you haven't watched that, go watch that. I identified the common traits. I talked about how I've dealt with them personally, how they may get in the way of like your ultimate happiness and well-being and personal growth, and just might get in the way of relationships, might get in the way of self-love, might get in the way of laying boundaries and all that kind of stuff. And so this week I'm going to talk about some coping strategies and how I've worked on these things in my own life in order to heal them. I always think that the great news about being traumatized is that unlike, like a mental illness, or even like a chronic physical illness, like I know that I'm always going to be chronically ill. I know that there's certain things about my physical body that are not healable. I know that the ways that I struggle in being autistic they're unchanging. I can find ways to cope. I can manage, I can I can do the things I need to do to feel good and like get through the day and be happy, but it's inherently who I am. And so, we go back to the serenity prayer. What I can't change, I need to accept. And so I accept and love those parts of me that are unable to change, or that like they're just worth accepting and worth loving, and they mean something in my life, and they've made me who I am, and I love who I am, so I'm grateful for them. Where trauma is concerned, these things are healable. You were not born with them. They were put into you, and they can be taken out in the same way. It just takes time. It just takes self-compassion. It just takes self-love. But any negative coping patterns that you may have, any things that you struggle with that are on this list, they are transcendable, they are healable, and that is the Silver Linings Playbook, TM, of being traumatized and having wounds around trauma. It's just, it sucks. So let's motherfucking get into it. So guessing what normal is. This is, a tricky one, because there is, like all of these, there is some like wading in the dark that's necessary in order to get to the light of like recontextualizing your circumstance and figuring out how you feel about yourself, figuring out how you feel about life, and figuring out what normal is to you. Your normal is going to be different than everyone else's normal. But guess what? That's true for everybody, even people who are not as traumatized as you. Everyone, when they get to adulthood, has to figure out life from scratch. Again, your starting point may be way, way further back than some people's, but that doesn't mean that all is lost. It doesn't mean it's hopeless. And it doesn't mean that you can't maybe not catch up, but like you can walk through life with joy and gratitude and peace and self-love and self-forgiveness. You are worthy of love. You can call love in. You can build community. You can have respect. You can create fulfilling relationships. You can leave behind you and overcome and heal and forgive and like release. Exhale out the stuff that was put in you that isn't true, that isn't yours, that isn't normal or acceptable. I love the phrase like an acceptable reaction or response to an unacceptable circumstance. So like when you're traumatized, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts lately because I went through something like there's a fire in my apartment building. It was really scary. The firemen had to break the windows to like get in and put the fire out. And my partner and I have both been struggling in our own ways with it. And so the way that I heal is I like take some alone time. I listen to a lot of like self-help and spirituality podcasts. I just like reacquaint myself with divinity, with healing, with feeling, the importance of feeling our feelings and all that stuff. And someone said they were talking about traumatized people, and instead of being like, why would you be this way? Why are you this way? What's wrong with you or whatever, being like, why wouldn't you feel this way? Like, what happened to you? Tell me your story and let me respond to you in a way that is like loving and understanding and compassionate, and being like, having been through what you've been through, why wouldn't someone feel the way that you feel? Why wouldn't someone react to life the way that you react? And so I think normal is totally overrated. It's totally unnecessary. You can redefine normal for yourself. You can decide, like the most powerful thing in the world for me, the biggest aha moment and like realization I ever had was that I was in control of my life, that I really didn't know this, because when you're in childhood, you're trapped in your circumstances. There's no way out. Everything is a nightmare. It's just like really difficult to navigate, and there's no safety to be found. That's why we learn to dissociate, because all of our safety lives inside of us. That's the only place to go, is like deep, deep, deep within your own mind. And so then I grew up and I was still operating under those same lessons that I learned in childhood, that I had no say in the matter, that like I wasn't safe, that I couldn't walk away from things, that I had to stick it out and keep fighting, and loyalty was everything. And then it slowly dawned on me that like, oh, I do have a say in this, and like I can walk away from anything or anyone who isn't treating me right, or doesn't make me feel good, or doesn't contribute to my healing and happiness. Oh, I can say no when I mean no. Oh, I can move on at any point in any situation. I can say, this is as far as I'm willing to go with you, and I can change my life in any direction. I don't have to live where I live. I don't have to do what I do. I don't have to stay at a job that mistreats me and oppresses me and disrespects me. Like just this huge realization of like, I get to define normal. And I talk about this in my radical self-acceptance, and in several of these episodes, because it's just like a profound realization I had that's very like, duh. But when I was reading that Toxic Parents book by Susan Forward, I was reading about how abusive mothers often, if they are fat phobic, or if they hate their own bodies, if they struggle with body image, if they're always dieting, they can put an unhealthy body image and an unhealthy relationship with food and dieting into their daughters. And I realized that everything bad I ever thought about my body came from somewhere else, like came from someone who wasn't living in my body. I didn't decide how I felt about my body. Like there was no consent available, but just like I was brought up in a culture, in a family, in a household where fat was seen as like the worst thing you can be. And where my mother constantly bullied me for not being thinner, for being fat. She literally called me fat ass more than she called me by my name. And so I internalized all of that, of course, because how could you not? And then when I'm reading this book, I'm like, well, if someone else put it there, maybe I can take it out. Maybe I can decide for myself how I feel about my body. And that began my radical self-love journey where I was like, everything people have made me feel bad about, maybe it's not that it's inherently bad objectively. Maybe that was just their fucking opinion, and it has no place within the sanctuary that is my body and my home. Shout out to my podcast episode, Your Body, Your Home. If you haven't listened to that, go check it out because it's great. If I don't say so myself. Or if I do say so myself, I think that's the one. Difficulty with following through. So I talked in the last episode about how this one is because you aren't really modeled, like parents don't model how to do this for you. And also there's a lot of overlap between trauma and ADD and ADHD. And so the impulsivity and the lack of ability to focus. I talked about this in the last one too. Gabor Mate thinks that there is a correlation between dissociating in unsafe childhood circumstances and ADHD or ADD in adulthood. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a scientist. I don't know about any of that. I know he's controversial to some people, but that seems to make sense to me. It's like if your attention is divided as a coping mechanism, you get used to that way of being. And there's studies that say that trauma like causes brain damage. So I don't know, it just makes sense that like difficulty focusing would come from that. You know what I mean? It's just like a way that you survived that you carry with you. And ADD and ADHD isn't like healable. It's one of those things that is kind of, you know, it is who you are. But it is manageable. Like you can find coping strategies, and most importantly, like shaming yourself or being a drill sergeant in your head is not the way to heal anything. So, not yelling at yourself, not seeing it as like a character flaw, realizing that, let's talk about normal. Everyone has issues with this, you know? There's this concept that I come up against every time I create something new and Brene Brown calls this like day 2 syndrome, where she was doing these seminars with big companies and stuff, and they were 3-day seminars, and day 2 was always horrible. Everyone was always like exhausted and no longer excited about the process and just like over it and tired. And so they realized they had to be like gentler on day 2 because everyone was like struggling. You know, it's the middle of the journey. If you think of like a 3-act play, act 2 is where all the conflict happens. And it's the hardest part. And so I come up against this thing, and every time I create something new, whether it's like writing a book, creating this podcast, doing these videos, making an album, like writing a song, whatever. When I used to do burlesque, it was really bad because burlesque includes like choreography, choosing music, like a concept. I like to tell a story with my routines, and then like actually figuring out how to get out of the costume and like making the costume. So there's so many steps, and I would, right in the middle of it on my day 2 vibe, I would be like, this is impossible. I can't do this. I don't know what made me think I could do this. This is like terrible. I'm not good. I suck. And then if I would just keep pushing, you know, if I would just wade through, take a break when I needed it, but come back to it, I would break through that and come to a place where like, wow, I did it. And it's amazing. It's better than I thought it would be. And I used to talk about this a lot with my little babies, my piano students. They would be like crying because they were so frustrated that they couldn't get like a scale or a song, or, you know, it moves up. So like you start with your hands playing the same thing, and then it graduates to like playing different things. And every single time there would be this wall of learning, this block that they would have to bust through in order to master the next level. And I would always say, in a few weeks, if you practice, in a few weeks, you're going to be able to do this. And you're going to look back and you're going to be like, remember when I used to think this was hard? And without fail, every time in a few weeks, they would be able to do it. And we would be moving on to something else that was challenging and frustrating. And I would always remind them, remember last time? But Brene Brown says that no amount of experience ever prepares you for day 2. You're always going to feel that. And I think sometimes like the amount of triggers that traumatized people carry within us, and the amount of self-doubt that we're up against, and the amount of like fear and shame and just I always think of my own trauma as like a Santa sack, just a huge bag that seems impossible to carry. It's like so big and heavy. And that's what I've had to carry with me throughout life. And it's like, no wonder things have been hard for me. No wonder things have felt insurmountable. No wonder I look around at my more well-adjusted colleagues and friends and peers and partners and stuff, and I'm like, why do they have such an easier time than me? And I realized as I unpack it, as I take things out of that sack, and I'm lighter and I can move much more quickly and I don't get snagged on things as easily, I realize that like, that's why. And I just kind of like accept that and release any judgment or shame about it. I don't carry resentment about it. I'm just kind of like, my life has been hard and there's no need to compare because no one else started from where I started. No one else's normal looks like mine. And in fact, my experience has inherent value. And because I've been through such hardship and because I have to fight tooth and nail for every little tiny crumb I get in this life, I am humble, I am compassionate, I am patient, I am grateful, so grateful every day. And every little bit of healing, little bit of ease, everything that just comes to me feels like a miracle. I just have this like level of appreciation that is, it's like how when I kept telling the universe, like, send me my person, like send me the love that I deserve. Send me someone who loves like I do, and I will never take it for granted. And I can promise you, almost 3 years in, I have not taken a single day for granted. I love my partner wholeheartedly. I show up, I show out, I am fully in because I went so long without it and I was just asking for it. And now that I've got it, I'm like, yes, I do. I got it. Not a doubt in my mind, and that sureness and that beautiful, I don't know. It always reminds me of when I was camping, living out of my truck and living outside, and I could only really shower like once every few days or like once a week sometimes once every 2 weeks. And every time I took a hot shower, I was like crying from gratitude. Denial of something isn't fair, it isn't right, it isn't good. Everyone should have all their needs met, in a perfect world. In my anarchist utopia, everyone has food, everyone has shelter, everyone has love, everyone has community, everyone has support. But that's not the way life is right now. And in my experience, not saying that everyone has to feel this way, but in my experience, going without just made me that much more grateful and appreciative, and like to truly see the miracle in the small things. I appreciate stability so much. I appreciate abundance so much. I appreciate answered prayers and love and friendship so much. And that's because I've gone without. And if I hadn't gone without, if everything had been easy for me, I don't know if I would be able to touch the depth of that gratitude. So as far as following through, like, realize that everyone goes through that. Everyone has those moments of huge mountains of self-doubt they have to climb. Everyone is Sisyphus rolling that boulder up the hill only for it to roll back down again at the end of the day. We're all dealing with that. That's normal. That's like something that's part of the process. And it's just your job to love yourself through that. It's just your job to like see when you're triggered, and go listen to my episode, What Our Triggers Teach Us, if you want to hear more about that. But see when you're triggered, see what the trigger is, investigate it, find the core wound, love yourself through it, pour love into that wound, work on the healing it, tend to it, clean it, bandage it up, don't just stuff it down again. And as you can allow your process, or allow learning and stumbling through how to follow through on something. Every time you do it, it'll get easier, but it'll teach you a lot. It'll teach you a lot about your fears, a lot about your insecurities, a lot about your self-doubt. And it's always an opportunity to discover even more about the full spectrum of your own reservoir of self-love. Lying when it would be just as easy to tell the truth. The key to healing this one is to is to make the truth acceptable to us. Telling the truth is highly discouraged in toxic families. You are taught to lie, you are taught to cover up, even if the person isn't like, you need to lie about what's going on in this household. I said this in the last episode, like family first, what happens in this house stays in this house is very common. It's like the mantra of toxic families, and it fosters this loyalty, it fosters this kind of like cult mentality, but it's really unhealthy, and it teaches you it really confuses you about lying and telling the truth. Not even to mention the fact that when you are just being a kid and making observations, like pointing out that your mom drinks a lot when she does, but then you get in trouble for it, or one of the most innocent ways this happens is like when kids are like, you're fat, or like, why are you fat, or like, you have a big belly, or whatever, and parents like punish them, and the kids are just making observations. It's the adults that are uncomfortable in making a judgment. So like, this is why it's important to do self-love work with fatness, and like to not shame people for being fat, because if you carry shame about it, you might react disproportionately to a child. I had a woman I worked for who was not a very nice person, but I was a nanny for her family, and she told me that she called her aunt fat when she was like 4, and her aunt washed her mouth out with soap. What are you doing to that kid? You're discouraging them making observations, you're teaching them to lie, and you're also making fat a bad word, and that's doing a lot more damage as that person moves through the world, because you're teaching them a thing about fatness, when you could just as easily be like, this is what I do now. I'm like, yeah, my belly's big. Isn't it comfy? Isn't it beautiful? Just try to like reframe and recontextualize for children instead of punishing them for just like commenting on the world, because children don't know better than, like, they don't know about lying. They just like are living the world for the first time, and they're like observing things, and how you respond to those observations teaches them how to be in the world. And so realize that you were taught to lie. Realize that the truth was not made sacred to you. This makes me think of like in homophobic religious families, how queer kids have to hide, and how that hiding, how you do one thing is how you do everything. You learn to be someone who hides, and hiding turns into lying. Hiding turns into betrayal eventually if you don't stop that process. And it's the same with lying, with codependence, with dissociation, like all of these things that we do to protect ourselves in these unsafe places in childhood as adults can turn into toxic traits that hurt other people. And that's why it's so important to make yourself aware of them. It doesn't make you a bad person if you default to lying. Lying is easier in the short term, but as far as long term, as far as building intimacy, as far as being seen, felt, and understood, and seeing, feeling, and understanding others, and building community on that vulnerability, lying doesn't serve. So just make the truth. This is why I'm a prophet of, I'm raising the roof. I'm a prophet of journaling, because it's a sacred space where you can tell the truth to yourself, you can get acquainted with the truth, you can get familiar with the truth, and you don't have to have the pressure of sharing it with anyone else. It took me weeks sometimes to get to my own truth, because I was so clouded by other people's perceptions, by other people's opinions, by expectations of me and what I should be and who I should be. And so it took me weeks, and that's why I got into writing, because I needed to get to my truth. I needed to like familiarize myself with the feeling of it in my mouth and in my heart, and make it okay to speak out loud. And so I lived with it with myself for a while before I could bring it forth to other people. And now I never lie. I tell the truth, even if it's a hard truth, even if it's gonna I try to deliver it kindly and compassionately, but even if if the other person I'm asking to receive my truth, even if they struggle with receiving it, it's none of my business. It's only my job to put it out there, right? How it's received, once I put it out there, it's like out of my hands, and it's in the other person's. That's what the ball is in your court means, And so make the truth acceptable to you. Don't be afraid of the truth. redefine it for yourself and recontextualize it and break free from the idea or the expectation that you're supposed to lie, that you're supposed to hide, that you're supposed to feel shame, that you're supposed to sacrifice yourself and your own well-being because other people can't live in their truths. Whoopsie. I'm like looking at this on my on my Canva app, and I just edited the hell out of a slide that I didn't mean to. I'm gonna have to go back and fix that later. Next one is judging yourself without mercy. Go listen to my episode on radical self-acceptance. I also think I have one way back about like how you speak to yourself. I can't remember which one it is though, so I'll figure it out and let you know. Talk to yourself kindly. You know, I call myself baby. I talk to myself like a parent, you know, like a sweet parent, like I would if I were taking care of a child. It's all affirmation. It's all love. It's all forgiveness. It's all reassurance. You know, if I do something that's failure or fucking up or not being my best self, if I step out of my integrity for a moment, I come to the parent place in me as my child self, and I say, what do I do? Help me out here. I'm really suffering. And I'll say, it's okay, baby. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has a hard time. Everybody steps out of their integrity once in a while. All you can do is learn from this. All you can do is love yourself a little better. All you can do is affirm yourself, forgive yourself. You know, all you can do is learn from this experience. All you can do is do better. You can't do better till you know better, but once you know better, do. And I just get it all together and carry on. And there's no need to judge yourself. Nobody has ever grown from a place of shame. Nobody, no matter what cancel culture has told you. Shaming doesn't work. Shaming is an ego-driven impulse. It's wanting to feel superior to, it's wanting to feel better than. It's the worst part of ourselves that we want to project onto each other. What really moves people to change is compassion. What really moves people to change is the opportunity for themselves to find their own way. Every bit of truth that you share with someone else plants a seed of truth within them, you know? And while some people may be really hard-headed and may be really stubborn as far as their learning goes, and their ego may be thicker than other people's, and they may be a little bit less willing to know good information when they hear it, if given good information, it still plants a seed. It might take 3 lifetimes, you know, but eventually it'll take root, eventually it'll grow, and eventually it will change them. But most importantly, this process is crucial to your own self-love. Nobody's gonna love you like you do. Like our ultimate purpose in this life is to become a friend to ourselves, is to get to know ourselves and to love ourselves deeply and fully and abidingly with abundance. And you can't do that while you're judging yourself, especially without mercy. You know, if you wouldn't say what you say to yourself to a friend or a loved one or a kid in your care, then don't say it to yourself. You can train your mind to think more positively about yourself. You can, you know, this is like when you're walking and you drop something. You literally just drop something, you know, and you're like, oh, I'm so fucking stupid. I'm so clumsy. I'm such an idiot. And it's like you just drop something. Like there's no need for all that bullying. Like you can just be like, whoops. It's no big deal. And if you catch yourself thinking thoughts like that, being mean to yourself, being a bully to yourself, judging yourself without mercy, you can gently correct. You can be like, no, baby. Let's be kind. Let's be gentle. Let's be forgiving. Let's just say whoopsie or say fuck. But you don't have to make yourself, you know, you don't have to make yourself a villain or like look at it as a character trait if you fuck up. You don't have to I mean, there are people who've done terrible things. I think we've all done things that we regret in our lives. We've all made decisions and choices and acted from a hurt place and hurt other people. And the only way to live with that and to take responsibility without going into a shame spiral is self-love. That's the antidote to everything. You are worthy of love. Everyone is worthy of love. You exist, and therefore you are worthy of love. You are worthy of gentleness. You are worthy of compassion. But that doesn't mean that you are entitled to it necessarily from outside of you. Like if you've caused harm to someone and you want to make amends, they may not want to receive your amends. And so you might have to give that to yourself within yourself. And that's okay. It should come from within yourself. So if you're holding on to resentments towards yourself, if you're judging yourself really harshly, if you have a super negative self-talk voice playing over and over in your head, you can fix that. You can retrain yourself. You can think more loving thoughts. You can decide how you feel about your own being. And all it does is take a little work and a little practice. Difficulty having fun, taking yourself too seriously, and extreme responsibility or irresponsibility, I think all go together. And the healing of this, I think, is inner child work, is getting back in touch with the ways that you find joy in experience that don't have anything to do with capitalism or making money or like expectations. So for me, like, I really like to play. I really like to laugh. I love to laugh. I love to be silly. I love to like go swimming and just like be a dolphin and like jump in and out of the water. I love to dance. I love to go on long walks in nature. I love like silly voices. I just love playing, and I always have. I love like routine play because I'm autistic, so I love like choreographing a dance or learning how to play a cover song or doing stuff like this. I like deep conversation. And I've had to really learn to like let loose. I think part of the judging yourself without mercy lends itself to taking yourself too seriously, which lends yourself to not being able to relax and have fun, because how we treat ourselves is how we think the world is going to treat us. So if you're hyper judgmental towards yourself, you're expecting everyone else to be sitting around and judging you. And sometimes that's a reality. Like if you find yourself in company with really judgmental people, it might be true. I grew up with a very judgmental, very like narcissistic family whose main source of joy was being mean and name calling other people and talking shit. And so everywhere I went, I was drawn to those kinds of people, and they were drawn to me. And it wasn't until I realized my integrity and the truth of me that I realized, like, I actually don't enjoy this. I don't find this fun. It hurts my feelings so deeply. I feel like I'm dying inside when I find out that someone I love has betrayed me by talking shit about me. And so like, I think I need to like figure this out and stop engaging with people who operate this way because it hurts me too much. And and so it might be a reality, like that might be the normal that you came from, but it doesn't have to stay that way. You can choose kinder people. You can choose people who don't judge you. You can choose people who relax and are themselves around you, and so you can relax and be yourself around them. Figure out what feels fun to you. Figure out where safety is and how you can like relax into fun in safety. I think it really is about letting go of judgment and also like finding presence. That's why initially I really loved smoking weed. And I still to this day love psychedelics because it takes you to a place of like ultimate presence. And in the presence, you really do connect with your inner child. You connect with like the awe inspiring vibe of nature or music or orgasms or or whatever, moving your body, feeling in your body, feeling the beauty of being alive. And so I like those tools to find presence. But yoga is just as much a tool for finding presence. deep belly breathing is just as much a tool for finding presence. So, just getting in touch with being present, even if it's just for a moment at a time, even if it's just for a breath at a time, even it only happens when you're in nature, or it only happens when you're having a really good conversation. Just like taking those little moments, being as present as possible, feeling the joy and the bliss that comes from them, and then expanding that into more and more areas of your life as you get better at it, as you get more in practice and mastery of it. And as far as extreme responsibility or extreme irresponsibility, like, I think just understanding that if you're extremely responsible, that too much pressure may have been put on you at too young an age. Maybe you knew too much information, or you relied on too heavily, or you had a parent that was enmeshed with you and you were more like their partner or their friend or their therapist instead of their kid. The roles may have been reversed, and that the best thing you can do for yourself in that mode of operating is like relax. Stop judging yourself, find presence, find play, engage self-compassion, engage self-forgiveness, relax, allow yourself to be fallible, allow yourself to be flawed, allow yourself to be whatever you need to be in whatever moment you need to be it. And this isn't easy. Like, it's very easy to say, but it's not that easy to do, because if you've set up your relationships in such a way that you are the caretaker, that you're the responsible one, you're the one who always shows up for everybody, you're like super codependent in that way, you may lose a lot of people when you start becoming fallible, when you let yourself be flawed, when you let yourself bail on things, when you let yourself take care of yourself, when you start saying no. And so there is some loss and some grief in that. And for a codependent person, that's like your greatest fear, right? Like, if I show everyone who I really am, I'm going to be rejected. And then you're rejected. But you lived through it, and it's worth it, because when you can build relationships from a place of authenticity and honesty and true sharing, you attract people who allow you to be the totality of yourself, and that can allow you to relax. As far as irresponsibility, I think the way towards healing that is realizing that you may have been a runner. You may be someone who got the hell out, who avoided the drama of the family, who knew really young that shit was fucked up and you needed to get out of there. You may have protected yourself from being avoidant, or from, losing yourself in substances or relationships, or, you may be a little bit more of a like chaotic energy, but you can always find grounding, you can always find stability, you can always create that within yourself. You can create that normal, that safety, that loving sanctuary within yourself. You can complete those projects, you can form lasting relationships, you can just become the stable presence that you didn't have. And I think the first step in that is realizing that, like, you are your own safe place. You can create your own inner peace. You can create your own inner confidence. You can create your own belief system, your own, you're in charge of your life. You're in the driver's seat. And just because you weren't taught stability doesn't mean that you can't cultivate it. It just takes work. As I said before, you're starting from way far behind, and so you might have to do a lot of catching up, or researching these kinds of things. It reminds me of when you start to read about financial literacy, it's really jarring, because you're like, wow, some people really grow up with parents who teach them these kinds of things. But those of us who grew up in chaotic households, there wasn't time or space to teach you about saving or insurance or how to pay taxes or anything like that, because everyone was barely holding on. And so you might have to learn from a more, buy a Adulting for Dummies book or something, and start way back from the basics, and that's okay. It can be daunting, it can be frustrating, it can definitely like trigger some anger and some resentment, and that's okay. That's normal. That's a normal reaction to abnormal circumstances. And that's where that, again, self-compassion kicks in. That's where that patience with yourself kicks in. That's where it's really important to be a parent, a loving parent to yourself, and be like, it's okay. I understand that it's frustrating. It fucking sucks. It's not fair. It's not fair that some people get such a head start and some people get such a fucking, kick to the shins right out the gate. But it doesn't mean you can't figure it out. All hope is not lost. Creating stability for yourself can be really rewarding. As someone who's swung between the two extremes of extreme responsibility and extreme irresponsibility, finding stability and creating structure in my life, giving myself a bedtime, enforcing these like beautiful self-care rituals, figuring out a way to organize my work schedule, figuring out the balance of like not overworking or not working and devoting time to all the other things that bring me joy. Like, it has really become a really beautiful journey and experience that at first seemed really daunting. But the way that I'm able to reparent myself heals things that I really, when I first started this journey, thought were not healable and not fixable in the slightest. Overreacting to changes over which you have no control. This comes into that place of divine acceptance. There are things that happen in our lives, the biggest one being death. We don't know when we're going to die. We don't know when anyone we love is going to die. We just know that it is going to happen. It's life's only guarantee is that we're all going to meet death in the end. And we don't know when that end is. Ask not for whom the bell tolls, But if I think one of our big purposes in life is to become a friend to death, is to make peace with it, is to live with the knowledge of it every day without living in fear of it every day. And just realize that, like, if that's the end, if that's where we're all heading, let me try to have as good a time as possible. Let me be as loving as possible. Let me spread as much love as possible. Let me be as much of a light as possible. Let me walk as gently as possible as I can on this earth. Let me leave it better than I found it. And that should be a really beautiful motivator towards embodying our best self as much as we can as we move through this world. And if you can like get to accepting that, that's something that Dr. Maya Angelou said, is that once she made peace with death, life became easy. And I think that there's a real truth to that. But that's the big one that we're all avoiding. That's why people, get Botox and fillers and facelifts. That's why, that's why we are so obsessed with youth. One of the many reasons. But mainly it's about like prolonging life and like avoiding death and just closing our eyes and ears to it instead of just like embracing the beautiful miracle of existence that is life on this earth. And that, it's just like a microcosm of how we go through everything. Like, the universe is communicating with you through your whole life about who you are meant to be, what you need to change and when you need to change it, through the spiritual antenna of your emotions and your intuition. And so you're being guided and given steps and like given advice the whole way through. And what so many of us do is like, la, 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 I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to change. I don't want to do anything different. I don't want to leave this shitty relationship. I don't want to change careers. I don't want to move. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. It's too exhausting. I'm too scared. I can't do it. And I heard when I was doing this podcast listen that I've been doing to like get my batteries charged again, I heard that people who have complex PTSD are much less risk averse than people who don't. So like if you've been through trauma, you cling to stability, and that's why we're reluctant to change because we don't want, with change comes instability. Like it's a trigger for us to change. And you know, this in its most extreme form results in like obsessive compulsive thoughts or like rituals that make you feel safe and protected, even if it's just an illusion. And so I think accepting change and learning how to flow, learning how to release, learning how to surrender is so important. I have a bunch of episodes on these topics if you'd like to hear more, but this YouTube video is getting a little long, so I'm just gonna move it on. Constantly seeking approval or affirmation. This goes back to radical self-acceptance and self-love, where like that, you do need that. Everyone needs that. We're interdependent communal beings, but you can cultivate that from within yourself, and you should cultivate that from within yourself. It's okay to need it. It's normal to need it. Everyone needs it. Anyone who pretends like they don't is probably lying. But if you're not receiving it, you can give it to yourself, and it can become the foundation on which you call in approval and affirmation from outside sources. And I'm still working on this myself. I need so much of it, and I really don't get enough. And so I have to remind myself every day to give it to myself in order to feel better, and in order to keep going, and in order to believe in myself. And yeah, it's self-love is a practice. It's a daily practice. It's not something that like, yep, I love myself, that box is checked off, I never have to work on it again. It's every day. Feeling different from other people. You are different. Everyone's different. Everyone has a totally unique perspective, a totally unique sense of being, a totally unique like way of perceiving the world, and it's beautiful and it's right, you know, it's as it should be. And you know, the isolation of being traumatized is in opposition to healing. Like finding people who see the world in a similar way, or who vibe in a similar way, who don't remind you of your shitty home, but remind you that love exists in the world, that light exists in the world, that healing is possible, that show you a mirror to the most beautiful parts of yourself. That's what we're looking for. That's what's healing. Different is not a sin, you know? Different is a gift. And what you experienced has value, in the sense that like it made you who you are, and who you are right now is beautiful. Who you are right now is exactly who you're supposed to be. You're exactly where you're meant to be. You don't have to run, you don't have to look, you don't have to hide, you don't have to create anything new. You just have to uncover what's already there, what's just been covered up by the trauma, by the experiences you've had. But the soul of you is pure. The soul of you is beautiful. The soul of you is love incarnate. And fuck different, you know, or embrace different, however you want to look at it. But different is not bad. Extreme loyalty, even when it's inappropriate. I'm going to do a whole nother episode on this, so I'm not going to talk about it right now, but boundaries, reciprocity, go where your grass is watered. And then lastly, impulsivity. I think this comes from like, it reminds me of the game Hungry Hungry Hippos. You know, when you're in a trauma situation, you just want to get what you can get when you can get it. And I think this is why we have like these wealth hoarders who are so obsessed with materialism, and like medieval dragons, just like getting as much as they can get and fuck everybody else. Is from the impulsivity of trauma, is from, you know, a lack of awareness, a lack of inner fulfillment, a lack of love, a lack of spiritual connection, a lack of community. It's just from being in survival mode. Like survival mode in and of itself elicits feelings of impulsivity, because like, you know, it reminds me of in a horror movie when someone is running from the killer and they don't see a root in the forest, and so they trip and fall over it, and the killer kind of gains on them. It's like you can't be present with where you're walking or running when you're running for your life. You can't be aware, and it usually gets you into more trouble. Whereas if you could be present and aware in the fullness of the moment, you would be a lot safer. But that's kind of impossible to do when you're in survival mode. So forgive yourself for the impulsivity, take a breath when you need it, slow down, and do one little step at a time. Think through the actions and the consequences of those actions before you make a choice. If you need to ask for time, ask for time. If you need to ask for patience, ask for patience. And most of all, be patient and loving with yourself. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to hear the full episode, the link will be down below. And I will talk to you next time. Happy healing. Bye.
This one goes out to all my status quo heathens. My day